Well, joining us now is Eric Grenier, polls analyst and founder of the Writ. Hello, Eric.
Hello.
So let's start with the horse race, because we know that the Liberals have been gaining ground on Conservatives these past few weeks. Where do things stand right now?
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing that the race is getting tighter between the Liberals and the Conservatives. On average, right now, the Conservatives do still have the lead, though we have seen a number of polls recently that have suggested that that lead could be in the very, very low single digits. One thing is for sure is that it is a much tighter race between those two parties, and I do think that we are heading towards a neck-and-neck race. You can also see with those numbers, though, that the NDP continues to struggle, continuing to drop in the polls. We have them now just a little bit over 13% in the polling averages. So we're definitely seeing a much different race over than what we saw just a few months ago. And even as with each passing week, we do see that the numbers suggest that this election is getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, tighter and tighter. You know, how much of that, when you look at these numbers, is Mark Carney, though? Because I wonder whether or not these numbers reflect the fact that, you know, I guess 2 weekends ago now, he won the leadership of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I do think that that is part of it. We are seeing that his numbers are lifting the Liberals up, that the numbers that we've seen over the last few weeks are better than the numbers the Liberals had in the few weeks before Justin Trudeau officially stepped down. And we have seen numbers about Mark Carney himself that do suggest that he does stack up quite well against Pierre Poilievre. So I do think that a lot of this is Mark Carney. A lot of it is also the fact that Trudeau resigned, that the Liberal government has been dealing with the threat of tariffs from Donald Trump. But I do think that Mark Carney has been giving them that extra little boost that is putting them into this very close race with the Conservatives.
Okay, well, let's talk about seat projection now, though, because, you know, going through your data, when you look at it, yes, the Conservatives have still this lead, but in terms of seat projection, what is that looking like right now?
Well, right now, both the Conservatives and the Liberals are in minority territory, and we do have, in my projections, just a very small gap between them. 17 seats might seem like a lot, but a lot of those seats are actually, a lot of them in Ontario, a lot of them right now being projected to be decided by just a handful of points. So if we do see that in the next set of polling that the Liberals are up another point, another 2 points, you could very easily see those seat projections flip. The Liberals do not need to be ahead in the polls in order to be ahead in the seat count. We've seen that in the last two elections where they lost the popular vote, but were able to win a pretty solid minority government. So if we continue to see some of these polls that have the Liberals and the Conservatives even tied, once we get into a tied scenario between those two parties, you actually do have the Liberals with a decent chance of winning a majority government, just because of how that breaks down regionally and because of just how bad things are going for the New Democrats. Had them at just 12 seats in the projection right now. You need 12 for official party status in the House of Commons. With the NDP not winning a lot of seats, with the Bloc winning fewer seats than they currently hold, it means that there's a lot more seats for the Liberals and the Conservatives to win to get them closer to that majority threshold.
Well, in fact, when you take out that board that we just saw, but look more at the seat range, you actually have Conservatives and Liberals overlapping through much of that range.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it's hard to say who would win for sure. If tomorrow was election day, I would probably tell you that the Conservatives have an outside chance of winning the most seats, but it is more or less a toss-up. You know, you'd give about a 60% chance with these kinds of numbers that the Conservatives would end up winning, maybe a 40% chance for the Liberals, and it would all break down on how it goes at the regional level. Who ends up winning the most seats in the Lower Mainland, in the Greater Toronto area. So we are really in a very, very close race when it comes to the seats. We are also in a close race when it comes to the polls, but as I mentioned, the Liberals don't need to be as close to the Conservatives as the Conservatives need to be ahead of the Liberals in order to win the most seats.
Now, let's talk, you mentioned the GTA, but let's talk about Ontario, because as we look at these shifting numbers for the Liberals, how much of that, because you've noted Atlantic Canada and Quebec in the past, but how much are we now seeing a shift in Ontario?
I think that is what is really getting things to a much tighter race because, as you mentioned, going into the Liberal leadership race, we had seen that the Liberals had moved ahead in Atlantic Canada, that they had moved ahead in Quebec. They were closing the gap a little bit in Western Canada. But once Mark Carney got in, we've seen some polling since then that really suggests that things are a lot closer in Ontario. Part of it could have been the bit of the after effects of the Ontario provincial race, where obviously Doug Ford's PCs were well ahead of everybody else. But if the gap before in Ontario had been about a 10-point Conservative lead, we're now looking at maybe half that. And in some polls, we have actually seen the two parties tied in Ontario. So right now it is pretty much 50-50 in terms of the seat breakdown between the two parties in Ontario. And that is what has really pushed the Liberals much closer to the Conservatives in that national count. And again, if we see more polls in the coming week that have the Liberals ahead in Ontario, that probably means that we would have, in the next set of projections, the Liberals ahead of the Conservatives in the national seat count.
Okay, so we're going to have to watch for that. But, before you go, though, I was going through the writ. It was interesting because you say even in Alberta, bedrock Conservative support, there are some seats that could be up for grabs.
Yeah, when Justin Trudeau resigned, our projections had the Conservatives winning all but one seat in Alberta, and that would be Edmonton Strathcona, which is a bit of an NDP stronghold. But now, with the numbers we've seen in Alberta, the Conservatives still dominate, but the Liberal support has gone from about 11% at the beginning of January to now 22%. And with that kind of shift, we do actually see a number of seats in Calgary and in Edmonton where the Liberals could win again. We saw how in 2015, with roughly about the same level of support that they currently have in the polls, the Liberals were able to win 4 seats in the province, 2 in each city. That kind of outcome is again possible based on the kind of numbers we've seen. And bit of a question, if Mark Carney decides to run in one of those seats, then there could be that leader bonus as well, and maybe that could help the Liberals actually win even more seats in the city where Mark Carney decides to run, if he decides to run there.
Yeah, if he decides to run there. Although I think it's pretty safe to conclude now, Eric, this is a far more interesting race than it was at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to be a horse race for sure.
Okay, Eric, thank you for that. Polls analyst Eric Grenier.